Okay, good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for this quite special CPD webinar, actually, on a topic that I got interested in actually just the summer before last when I visited Majorca, and I had the absolute pleasure to meet Richard Thompson, who's the director at the Propeller Education Centre, and we were on a beach and we were talking about different things, and he got me really quite excited about a topic called Posidonia Oceanica. And this is a topic that I really could see educational value in, not just from sort of like adding it as a bit of an X factor in the classroom, but also to encourage students to critically think about things and to really think like a geographer. So we've been working together, and we decided that it was sort of like something that we could offer our expertise on, to show you how you could sort of like implement this within your classroom, and how it can encourage your students to sort of really critically think about different things. So we thought as a starting point, we'd just remind ourselves what it means to think like a geographer. You know, as we know, it is a multi-dimensional approach to thinking. And we want our students to think about the physical side of things, the human side of things, the economic, the social. We want them to look at the environmental. We want them to think about the political as well. I remember I used to have all these acronyms sort of like on my whiteboard saying, you know, come on, think about these things in all these different ways. And then we want to look at them, so get them to look at things spatially at different scales, at a global scale as well as a local scale, you know, and then over time, and we want them to be critical thinkers as well. And it's all about making those connections. So it's about sort of like bringing all of those things together. And this is what geography students and teachers actually do brilliantly. And this is where we need to sort of like think about how can we encourage, particularly the younger students, how they can become multidimensional thinkers, how they can critically think. And it's about giving them topics which allow them to do that. So building the skills. Margaret Roberts, who most of you will know is sort of like a bit of the guru in the geography teaching world. You know, I had the pleasure of seeing her speak a number of times, both at the GA conferences and also when I was a student, actually. And she says, if students are to learn to think like geographers, they need to be able to think critically and systematically about geographical knowledge and evidence. And that still is the case now. And it's more important now because there is so much information open to these students. You know, whereas when Richard and I were at school, and quite possibly some of you, you know, if we asked a question, it might take us weeks and months to find the answer because we're trawling through books and encyclopedias and asking questions. Whereas now they can Google it and they come up with all this information. Now, we talk about the GA, and they have done some amazing courses on critical thinking, and they talk about the fact that there are 3 key ingredients to critical thinking. The first one, to become better at thinking, to make better sense of information, and to become a more open thinker. And kind of these sort of like intermerge together. You know, it's quite organized, it's not random. It builds up sort of like to include all of these 3 dimensions. You know, we want to link it with our inquiry process, with our achievement. We want to have higher order thinking, because this is what the universities want. They want students who can multidimensionally think. They want them to be able to critically think and actually set sort of like some quite higher order thinking. You know, we want our students to develop their ability to ask good questions. You know, it's so important to ask a good question and reflect on their learning. You know, see where they've come, where are they going? We want them to examine the evidence. We want them to distinguish fact from fiction, actually, and fact from opinion, and look at alternative solutions. And we want them to be able to do this with the confidence through discussion, through debate. We want them to evaluate what other people are saying and consider other people's perspectives, and then develop their own opinion based on that evidence. ultimately, it's all about making connections. And as a geographer, we don't just want them to make connections with all of those things. We obviously want them to look at different countries as well. And I really, truly believe that they should have that emotional connection to a country, because that then allows them to sort of understand the bigger picture, the deeper understanding, a real connection, some sensory appreciation of the place or the topic. Now, how can we do that without taking all our students to every country that we study? Well, we can, something like imagery, sort of like independent learning projects. There's a variety of ways that we can do this. And if you're interested about sort of like implementation of a case study and about making connections, then we are running another webinar at the end of June. So please do sort of like, ask to be sent the link to that. Now, UNICEF have really started to consider the issues behind critical thinking. And they were saying that, education systems can miss a historical opportunity to provide children with the skills and the tools that they need and are necessary to critically assess information sources. So this is a global sort of like, forum that is saying that there are times that within our restrictive curriculums that are actually missing this thing that is very, very important. And they want us to try and implement opportunities to provide children with the skills to sort of like disseminate information and to question it. And that is really, really important. Just a little bit of information on this, so with the development of technology and the increase in popularity of social media use, the spread and acceptance of misinformation has become an increasing problem. Now, misinformation has always been around, but the internet makes its impact far greater, actually, and both children and adults are having to adjust to dealing with lots and lots of information, and then having to decide what is creditable, what is reliable, and actually what isn't. And without an understanding of what makes information credible, it's easy to sort of give in to those persuasive techniques and thus accept misinformation. As geographers, we're really highly sensitive to the world around us, and we interpret information quite multidimensionally. So this is really, really important. So it's also good to have an understanding between misinformation and disinformation. And, so therefore this could be something that you could have around your classroom to sort of say, well, actually you're being misinformed here, or are you being disinformed? Because I'm sure the students have come across both. And I think it's important to identify the difference between the two. Okay, so let's now get on to our main topic this evening, Posidonia Oceanica, or more commonly known as Posidonia in Majorca, actually, that's what they call it. And we quite commonly know it as seagrass. And I'm delighted, absolutely delighted to welcome Richard with us this evening. He's the director at Propeller Education Centre in Majorca, and many of you will probably know him from the GA lectures that he does on fieldwork, as well as lots of other different topics. He has a particular interest in this topic, but also its value within our geographical studies. And we thought it'd be really good to sort of like have a discussion about Posidonia, and just what it is, where it comes from, that sort of stuff. So I'm delighted. Well, Richard's going to pop into the screen now. So my first question really to Richard is, what is Posidonia Oceanica?
Right, okay, thank you very much, Karen. Yeah, I mean, it's here a lot of tourists come to Majorca, and they get very, very confused, and they just see it on the beaches here and think it's seaweed, and it's not. It's a plant that grows on the seabed rather than an algae, and it's called Posidonia Oceanica. Posidonia obviously referring to Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea, and Oceanica referring to the distribution. Now, it grows in dense meadows on the seabeds of the Mediterranean, only in the Mediterranean. There are lots of types of seagrass in the world, but Posidonia Oceanica is specifically in the Mediterranean Sea. Now, obviously, it's under the waves, so you need to get out your mask and snorkel, or your scuba diving gear, to go and check it out, which I have done. And you dive down and you'll see these meadows under the water. Bright green leaves, they're ribbon-like. You can see in the picture here on the screen. They grow in tufts of 6 or 7 leaves, up to 1 meter in length. And they've also got these subsurface roots and plant stems, which are called rhizomes. And they grow to a length of up to 150 centimeters. And it's the rhizomes that anchor the plant to the seabed. And the surface and subsurface rhizomes, they combine to form a reef-like structure, which is referred to as mate in Italian. Now, in terms of how extensive the meadows are, the meadows, it's estimated, cover about 3% of the Mediterranean basin, which is about 38,000 square kilometers. And as I said, it's quite difficult to know whether there is, if you're holidaying in the Mediterranean, is Posidonia present? Well, if there are meadows just offshore, you will be able to detect that by seeing on the beaches piles of decomposing Posidonia leaves. So that's the way to find out if you're in an area where there is Posidonia. Now, Majorca is very privileged to live here on this beautiful island, and with transparent waters and sandy seabeds around the coast, which are absolutely ideal conditions for seagrass to grow. So let's have a little look why seagrass is so important. Move to the next slide. Now, we've got a number of issues here. Firstly, Posidonia meadows oxygenate the coastal waters. Next, the mate, which I mentioned, this sort of natural reef structure, it helps protect the integrity of the seabed through compaction, and it prevents the coastal currents from transporting too much sediment away. And this is why some people refer to Posidonia as an ecosystem engineer, as in part it's creating its own habitat. Now this habitat, the meadows, it's a breeding ground for many types of fish and invertebrates, and this is where the fish come to feed. And the leaf canopy as well retains floating sediment particles, which means that this is one of the reasons why the water around the coast of Majorca is so transparent, is because the sediment particles retained in the leaf canopy. Another sort of advantage of Posidonia is that scientists can check out their indicators of environmental quality. Plants, Posidonia, can only grow in clean, unpolluted waters. And scientists can analyze the leaves for the presence of radioactive or synthetic chemicals or heavy metals, and which is a way to record contamination levels. Now, the other issue is due to the slow composition of the roots and rhizomes, the mate that is formed, this sort of reef-like structure on the seabed, it acts as a long-term carbon sink. Now, there's an incredible statistic here. A rugby-sized pitch, rugby-sized meadow of this plant can soak up 15 times more carbon dioxide every year than a similar sized piece of land in the Amazon rainforest, which is quite incredible. When I discovered that, I was like, well, this is really, really important. Now, lastly, I just want to talk briefly about erosion prevention. Now, when waves pass over the meadows, some of the wave energy is absorbed, thus lessening the impact of the waves when they hit the beach, and thus reducing the amount of coastal erosion. But there's another issue, is that when the dead leaves get washed up on the beaches in Majorca and other islands and other Mediterranean coasts, it actually protects the beaches. And it's an accumulation of material, forms natural sea defenses. And I've seen these, and it depends on which beaches you go to in Majorca, but there's one particular beach where these buffers are 4 meters high. And I've been there when there's been a storm, and you can see huge waves. These are the winter storms in Majorca, crashing onto the beach. And this sort of 4 meter high cushion of dead Posidonia leaves absorbs all that wave energy. And due to the elasticity and porosity of this structure, there's no damage to the beach. Beach erosion is limited, and it's just incredible to see in action. And it's estimated that a 1 kilometer belt of Posidonia meadow can generate more than 125 kilograms of dry seagrass material per meter of coastline. So that's sort of huge amount of material which can be used is used naturally to protect the coast. Okay, we can go to the next slide.
Perfect. Can I just sort of like, I mean, I remember sort of like, 10, 15, 20 years ago, a massive media thing about, we're cutting down the rainforest and we've got to do this because it's affecting sort of like the carbon and sort of like talking about climate change and all of that sort of stuff. And I think that was the big thing, Richard, when I was out in Majorca with my colleagues and we were looking at this, that I was absolutely sort of blown away by the fact that, a meadow of seagrass has 15 times more of the ability to absorb carbon. I think that one fact there just shows us, the impact and the value of these meadows, really, in terms of our global issues that all the kids at the moment are talking about.
Absolutely. And I think possibly that it's because the seagrass meadows are not visible. I mean, you need to be obviously scuba diving or snorkeling to see them. Perhaps it's not in people's minds. With the Amazon rainforest, you can get these sort of images of the damage being done there. But this is sort of but damage is being done to the seagrass, to Posidonia, which we'll come on to in a second.
Yeah, but I think that for sort of like students to have an understanding of that, I think it is just crucial actually moving forwards, and hopefully some of the programs that we've seen sort of like with very influential figures like Ben Fogle and David Attenborough and the Seaspiracy sort of like Netflix documentary, hopefully that will highlight this even more. Okay, let's move on. So, I mean, we've already shown the complete interest in terms of sort of like critically thinking and in terms of the sort of geographical and environmental value here. But can we look now at what makes it even more so of a geographical topic?
Yeah, I mean, I really do think it's an ideal geography topic because, I mean, as you said earlier, geographers, well, we're thinking, we have a multi-dimensional approach towards thinking, and as this slide shows here, you just have a look at this on the screen. This study covers aspects of physical, human, social, economic, political, and environmental geography. It's also, as we mentioned earlier, it's a local study, but it's one with an impact globally. And the last point I wanted to make is that there are huge numbers of stakeholders involved here. I've counted about 20 stakeholders, which again we'll come on to a little bit later. Lots of people have got different interests in Posidonia. Some are very anti, a lot of people are very pro, but we'll come on to that soon. So perhaps we could have a look at the problem here. Now, 5% decline in seagrass meadows per year in Spain, which is pretty shocking. And something which compounds this issue is that it grows incredibly slowly. Seagrass grows sort of 1 to 6 centimeters per year because of the leaves. So when it gets damaged, it takes a long time for this ecosystem to recover. Few other facts and figures: that it's estimated that perhaps 46% of underwater meadows in the Mediterranean have had some kind of reduction in range or density since the 70s. 20% have experienced a severe regression. But the figure we're looking at here, connected with Spain, is 5% decline per year, and for the reasons that we have here. So what I'd like to do is to talk about these different topics. Now, let's start about eutrophication. Now, as we're all aware, an ecosystem's response to the addition of nutrients is called eutrophication. And these nutrients, artificial nutrients, could be fertilizers or sewage or detergents, which has led to abnormal growths of algae. And when this happens, that blocks the light that is needed for plants, the process of photosynthesis. And you might have, some of you might have seen an extreme example of this over the past few weeks. Now, in the Sea of Marmara in Turkey, there is something rather unpleasantly named sea snot. Now, if you just Google that, there's it's an incredibly worrying example of extreme eutrophication. So it's worth Googling that. Sea snot in Turkey. Okay, next issue, dredging. Now, dredging takes place as part of the construction process here for ports, piers, and breakwaters. It is necessary. It's also for keeping ports accessible and open. It has to, it's something that is unavoidable. But the dredging can leave the roots and rhizomes of Posidonia exposed, which makes it more likely for wave action to remove them. And perhaps more of an issue, as far as I'm concerned, it's what happens to the material once it's been dredged. And what has happened in the past, it's been taken out to sea and just dumped, you know, a couple of kilometers offshore. But it's been dumped on a Posidonia meadow. And the Posidonia plants have been buried in sand and mud and effectively killed. So that's called siltation, that process, and that's particularly worrying. Construction. Now, the Posidonia ecosystem is very sensitive to changes in the input and output of sediment. And so when roads and houses, hotels and coastal areas are being constructed, that reduces the sediment input to these submerged coastal habitats. And it also, when there's construction, you can have these seasonal rivers in Majorca called torrents. The course of these torrents is affected, and this all changes the natural order of things. We've also got the construction of sewage outfall pipes, which leads to increased turbidity when the sewage enters the water, and obviously if you've got cloudy, turbid waters, that affects photosynthesis. Now, just going around here, marine pollution. Plants are very sensitive to pollution, and scientists have detected oil, detergents, paints, solid waste from ships and boats, all damaging the plants here. Competition from invasive species. Now, this is a tricky issue. There's been two non-native, fast-growing tropical algae that have been detected. The names Caulalpa taxifolia and Caulalpa racemosa. Hope I've pronounced those correctly. They were both accidentally introduced into the Mediterranean. And there's currently an ongoing debate in the science world as to whether these algae are harmful or beneficial to Posidonia. So watch this space. Propeller action. When speedboats drive over Posidonia meadows in shallow waters, the propeller blades just sever the leaves or tear out Posidonia thickets. The same happens with trawler fishing. It is illegal, but it does happen when people in the fishing industry are dragging their nets along the seabed. Thickets of Posidonia get dragged out, and you can find sort of clearings in these meadows where it's clearly visible where people involved in the fishing industry have broken the law and dragged their nets across these meadows. And again, when that happens, it increases water turbidity. The sediment gets stirred up, which obviously decreases the amount of light reaching these plants. And two more issues: anchoring. Now, in the past in Majorca, there were some permanent anchorage sites, and anchor chains of pleasure craft were being dragged through the Posidonia Meadows, stripping leaves, and you know, there's sort of huge swathes of Posidonia Meadows. If you dive down, you can see where they've just been stripped bare. And in the non-permanent anchorage sites, just the dropping and the raising of anchors has ripped out the leaves, the plants, the rhizomes as well. And lastly, the water desalination plants. Posidonia is very sensitive to increases in salinity in the water. And one of the byproducts of a desalination plants is brine, which has to be disposed of somehow, and it's normally pumped back out to sea. Now, if that is pumped out close to a Posidonia meadow, those plants will die because of the increased salinity. So there's this debate on should the pipes taking the brine extend for many, many kilometers out to sea where there are no Posidonia meadows. Possibly so, but you have to construct those pipe systems, and those are going through Posidonia meadows and damaging the meadows right now. So it's a tricky issue. So the level of impact of all of these causes of the 5% decline is highly debated. And you've got different stakeholder groups arguing that their particular industry is not nearly as responsible for the damage to Posidonia compared to other industries. Okay, and this is the issue. It's very, very tricky to get an exact figure. What percentage damage is being caused by anchoring or trawling or construction? But what is clear is that a combination of all of these factors, which are listed on this slide here, is having a very, very deleterious effect on Posidonia Oceanica. So, are there any solutions? Let's maybe go to the next slide. I've grouped the next two slides into two groups. So first I want to look at the maritime industries. So trawling, well, are there alternative fishing techniques? Yes, there are. But policing the high seas is not easy. I mean, boats can be tracked, but the techniques being used by the people on the boats, can they be controlled? It's tricky. So again, it's all about educating those people in the fishing industry of the fact that trawling is incredibly damaging to Posidonia. Maritime pollution. Well, yeah, large ships, smaller ships, they currently generate a lot of pollution from marine heavy fuel oil or diesel. So hopefully in the future, we'll be moving to a system where you have marine solar power systems that will become more and more common, which will hopefully lessen the impact of large ships and smaller ships on Posidonia Oceanica. Now, propeller action, again, it's difficult to control, to observe the whole coastline. So I think here it's about education. If boat users are aware of the issue, then hopefully they'll think about where they're driving their boats. And perhaps one way, that they can become aware is through the fact that in 1999, in Ibiza and Formentera, two of the other main islands in the Balearic Islands, the areas around those islands were declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The European Commission Habitats Directive has also identified the meadows as a priority habitat type for conservation. So these are all things that can help people to be aware of the issue. And lastly, in terms of anchoring, well, it's great news that in the Balearic Islands now, there's a website which is www.balearslifeposidonia.eu. And now pleasure boat owners, if they want to come to the islands and they want to anchor, they have to register on this site and go to a fixed floating buoy. And these are located around the island. And they can just connect, instead of dropping an anchor, they would just fix their boat with a rope to one of these buoys, which means that the Posidonia is protected. So this is in operation from June to September each year. Okay, let's have a look at the other solutions. And again, these are some solutions that people are coming up with. I've thought about this. I've read a lot on the topic. I've spoken to a lot of local people here in Majorca. Dredging, I mentioned already that strict controls need to be in place to control where the material is deposited once it's been dredged. Construction, again, there need to be stricter planning regulations. I mean, things are a lot stricter here than it used to be. So 20 years ago, things were relatively lax. If you go back to the start of mass tourism here in the late 50s, early 60s, just people were building wherever they wanted to build. Things have improved hugely, but it is very, very important for regulations to be tightened up even more. Eutrophication, again, need to have environmental legislation, but not just in terms of wastewater and sewage. The agricultural industry needs to be controlled as well. Plant nutrients from synthetic fertilizers or even organic fertilizers reach the sea and cause eutrophication. Desalination plants, what can be done there? I mean, Majorca, it's an island, there's a limited water supply from aquifers. And when you get huge numbers of tourists, obviously we're not talking about COVID times, but prior to COVID, more than 11 million people, tourists, visited Majorca in 2019, which was huge pressure on the islands, and particularly on the water. There's a limited amount, so desalination plants are in use. And as I mentioned earlier, the brine is pumped out, very, very damaging to the Posidonia Meadows. So what can be done here? It's a case of thinking about water consumption, which, if there's a reduction in water consumption, we can reduce the reliance on the desalination plants. And lastly, well, the competition from invasive species. That's something, again, it's being debated and researched by scientists at the moment, and research needs to continue because it's of concern. But again, I can't give you a definitive answer about whether it's the extent to which that is damaging or not.
Mm. I think all of those solutions, Richard, that you've just talked about, that just sort of like really sort of enriches or enhances to me, the use of this as a critically thinking and a real sort of like value geographical topic, because everything that we've spoken about here, with the erosion, with the tourism, with the changes in sort of like environmental policies and all of that sort of stuff, it's just perfect. And I know there's this other issue that you really want to sort of like mention, which we really saw when we were in Majorca. And actually we've had a question come through, if I can just ask that before you go on to this issue, because it really does sort of like come into that, about the name of the beach.
Well, I mean, there are a number of beaches. I mean, most of the beaches in Majorca you will find Posidonia. The one I was thinking about is just north of Calabona. If you want the actual location, please get in touch. We'll have details at the end of this session. I'll send you the exact location. It's quite difficult to find, but it's when you are there, it's this very small little cove, and it's quite incredible. But I'm happy to send the information through.
Thank you.
Well, the other topic, which is perhaps it's not always considered, but I think it's particularly interesting. It's about the fact I mentioned that the sort of dead Posidonia leaves get washed up onto the beaches, which provides this natural protection. Now, the problem with that for people a lot of people in the tourist industry is that the beaches are covered with dead Posidonia leaves, and some people view that as unsightly, and in the summer it can be quite pungent. It is true. So what happens is that the towns and villages which have coastline and a lot of hotels, they around about Easter time, they clear the beaches of all the dead Posidonia. And you can see in the pictures here, you can see the top picture, you can see a mound of Posidonia, which has been pushed into one place at the end of the beach by bulldozers. Now, that's all well and good. So you've got these sort of pristine beaches for the tourists. And that's all fine until about September, October time, when you get the autumn storms. And because these beaches are no longer protected by these Posidonia mattresses, if you like, huge amounts of erosion takes place, and the sediment on the beaches just gets washed away. And you've got an example in the bottom picture there of some really intense storms that we had back in January, and it was just incredible. The beaches, sand just got swept away from the beaches, and you were just left with these rocky, pebbly beaches, which is, if you're coming here as a tourist and you've been promised a beautiful sandy beach, you're not going to be too happy. So what happens, and you can see the middle picture, you can see that sand is shipped in sometimes from abroad. I mean, in the cases of sand brought in by ship from Africa, brought to the coast from quarries in Majorca, and it's deposited on the beaches. And as you will all be aware, this is it's either beach replenishment or beach nourishment. Okay, these are the terms which we've learned. And so basically it's very, very expensive, but the tourists and the hoteliers are happy because we have these beautiful sandy beaches for the summer. But then the whole process starts again. Comes to September, October, November, and all the sand is washed away again because there's no protection. So we're interfering with the natural processes of things, and it's a big issue. Should we be considering that? If we're coming here as tourists, should we be expecting these beaches? It's not natural in Majorca. Should we be perhaps thinking, well, it's more environmentally friendly to just put up with this Posidonia? It's the natural way of things here. We're interfering in natural processes, which is very, very costly and very, very damaging to the environment.
And I think that in itself is such a huge issue, isn't it? Because I mean, coastal defences is always going to be an issue that's got many different sides with many different stakeholders and lots of evidence one way and lots of evidence the other. And it's been a topic for as long as I can remember, and and this just makes it even a greater issue, really. And I think when we talk about critically thinking, we really want to be able to see all the different sides to the argument and look at it from so many different perspectives, and look at all the research and everything that has been come in, but see where that research has been carried out and by who. Did the person who did that research, were they a sort of like a global hotelier that sort of like prides themselves on their golden beaches, or was that research from a marine biologist who is looking at the sort of like the sea? Do you see what I mean? So there's so many different things. Or if
it was a marine biologist who provided the funding for the research. Obviously universities are needing funding. And if somebody from a particular industry said, "We'd like you to investigate this topic," feel free. Your findings, we're happy. Whatever you discover, but there is pressure. And I know from friends who work in universities, there's sometimes pressure exerted by particular stakeholders who are providing money for the findings to be, let's say, focused on a particular result.
Absolutely. And we know, don't we, just from history, that actually Majorca is quite heavily reliant on the tourist industry and needs the tourist industry, as a basis for their economy. So it's just weighing up these different things, So That's fantastic. Thank you. I mean, if we just go back to critically thinking at the moment, you know, we know that the ingredients that we need for our critical thinking skills, you know, we want the children, you know, our students to develop the ability to ask good questions. And one of those questions, like the one that I've just asked, you know, where has that research come from? You know, who's sort of like developed, were there influences on their research? You know, we need to try and find that out. You know, we want them to really reflect, and we want them to look at the evidence. And then discuss it and do all of that sort of stuff. Now, one of the reasons why critical thinkers has become, or critically thinking, you know, it's been an issue in our schools for a long time, but you may be interested to know that we've just set up a social enterprise called the Critical Thinkers. It's an awards scheme which is for students, Key Stage 3, 4 and 5. It's been developed with a group of educational psychologists and teachers like myself. And it basically encourages students to more critically think. And then by showing evidence that they are doing that in the classroom, they'll be rewarded. And it's such a fantastic scheme that just gives you the skills and the resources and the information, the support that teachers need to bring more critically thinking skills into the classroom, so that we can encourage our students. And it's something that Richard and I have been talking about for a long time, you know, encourage the students to actually question what's going on around them. And Richard has come up with some amazing ideas of how some of these skills can be implemented into the classroom, and also into geographical fieldwork situations as well. And two of the things, we're looking at debates, and we're looking at headline analysis. And Richard is going to go through sort of like some of these things, and I'll add some information into that as well. But these resources, if you, we're going to give you some links to where you can sort of like source some of them from. And also you can get in contact with Richard and myself, and we can point you in the right direction as well. So the first one then, stakeholder balloon debate.
Yeah, what I've done here is I've just sort of come up with 20 different stakeholder groups regarding Posidonia Oceanica. Now, many of you watching will be familiar with a balloon debate. But for those of you who are not, let me just briefly outline how it works. So what you would do, you would ask everyone in your class to research the position of a particular stakeholder. Now, the amount of help you give to your class obviously depends on the age, experience, and ability. But again, all of these 20 groups here have a particular interest in Posidonia. Yeah, and it's very easy to find out information on their views using Google. Now, once the students in your class have done the research, whether it's in the class or for homework, what I like to do is divide the class into groups of 6 to 8, and each group is put into a hot air balloon basket, which is just formed with a group of chairs. And everyone in that basket has to argue their case with regards to Posidonia. Now, after everyone has spoken, there's a secret vote within that group, and the person with the most votes is thrown out of the balloon. Okay, which most students I find tend to enjoy hugely. Then the remaining students then have an opportunity to speak again. There'll be another vote resulting in another person being ejected from the balloon, and so on. And it continues until there's just 1 or 2 people left. And it's a great activity for developing speaking and debating skills, and it teaches students about the other points of view as well. Now, I was talking with Karen about this, and she's got another idea, which is the silent debate.
Yeah, and I mean, I really like the balloon debates. I just love, because like Richard says, you know, the children find incredible ways to throw themselves out of this, you know, balloon. It's quite dramatic generally, and it really sort of like adds a sense of real enjoyment, because they start getting quite passionate about it. They don't want to be the first one out. That's never the case. So balloon debates are great. But yeah, I've come across an idea about silent debates, because we do find that obviously we do have students that don't want to give their opinion, and are actually don't have the confidence and the resilience to do that quite yet. And I mean, critically thinking, we want them to build their resilience so that they do become critical thinkers, but ultimately they might not want to do that sort of like vocally or in front of their peers or something like that. But that doesn't mean to say they can't be heard. So with a silent debate, you could put all the different stakeholders around the classroom, they do their research, they find out about everything, and then they actually use post-it notes and a voting system to do it that way. So it is completely silent. It's a funny way of organising a classroom, because classrooms, in my opinion, unless they're doing an assessment, should be quite noisy. But silent debates are great. It gets the kids up and moving around. They're reading and absorbing the information. They're then sort of like independently analysing it, or they could be in groups of 2 if they want to do sort of like whispering, and then they can then do their votes and do it that way. So it can work really, really well. And I think both sort of like debate situations allows the students to give their opinion, and their opinion based on information and an informed sort of like decision. So yeah, really good. But as Richard said, if you want any more information about this, please do get in contact with us, and we can point you in the right direction. So if we have a look at the headline analysis, I love geography in the news. I think it's one of my favorite things to do with students, and this is just fabulous, just fabulous.
Yes, now what we've got here, there's quite, well, for those people who don't speak Catalan or Spanish who live here, there is an English language newspaper called the Majorca Daily Bulletin, and that's printed. It's also online. Now, what I've done here is I've just had a quick look for headlines, or positive headlines, that refer to Posidonia. And if you look at the vocabulary here, things like treasure, preserving, appreciation. It's very ecological. It's all very, very positive vocabulary. And again, you can ask your students, you can give them a headline, and you can ask them to research this. Which stakeholders are involved in this particular story? What's their interest in Posidonia? What's the issue? What's the problem? Is it being solved? How? And you, as a student, do you agree or disagree with what's being written, and why? And students report back with their findings. It's a really interesting exercise. And what I've also done on the next slide, these are some, I've managed to find 4 perhaps more negative headlines from the Majorca Daily Bulletin over the last few years. So removal, demand for removal, jaws, risk from waste, alarmed by beach maintenance. And these are sort of quite negative headlines. So again, you know, what are the stakeholders involved in these stories, and what's their interest in Posidonia? What's the problem, etc. And then I've also did a little bit of research. I mean, obviously with Google Translate, you can actually, you type in, you know, Posidonia, and you could go to the Diario de Mallorca, or there's other newspapers based here, or international or national newspapers that you can use in Google Translate. You get a sort of 70–80% translation into English. So don't rule those out if you don't speak, or your students don't speak Spanish or Catalan. But there's another magazine in English called The Islander. And this is a monthly yachting magazine. And the headline I found here was "Seagrass continues to be contentious." Now, let me just read you this line here from Simon Rell. It says, "The nautical sector recently commissioned an independent survey on the subject, and the results showed that the yachts have a minuscule effect on Posidonia." Now, it's up to your students to read that article, perhaps try and get a copy of the report, and consider some of the issues we've mentioned. Is that 100% true? Again, it's up to your students to critically think and investigate this issue. I mean, I don't want to, I'm not going to criticize the people who wrote this report, but there's a lot of issues. The nautical sector recently commissioned an independent survey. Okay, some contradictory words there. again, it's up to you to decide. But it's a very, very interesting topic, and using local newspapers. Again, you can use this English language newspaper, the Majorca Daily Bulletin, or look at the Islander magazine, but also, as I said, you can use Google Translate to translate other newspapers written in Spanish or Catalan in Majorca.
Yeah, and do you know what, Richard, that just sort of like says everything that I want to sort of like encourage our students to do, because they are bombarded by headlines that are meant to generate an emotional feeling, that connection. And just by looking at these negatives, you see Jaws, not a shark, seaweed. We know that we're afraid of sharks, technically, but you're kind of sort of like saying from that headline, you need to be afraid of Posidonia, and this is where I think, just by looking at this topic and these headlines, you're giving the students the skills that they need for the future when they look at articles, when they look at Facebook, when they look at Instagram, and when they look at Snapchat, and they're seeing all these different things that they're bombarded with, to actually see through those, and to just assess where is the information coming from, who's generating that information, and what the purpose of that information, and what biases are going on behind the scene.
And I mean, that particular headline is also very interesting, because we mentioned right at the beginning that Posidonia is not seaweed. No. So just from the headline, we know that whoever wrote that perhaps hadn't done enough research.
Yeah.
So just from the headline, we're starting to get a feeling that something's not quite right here. So it's again, it's up to students to read these articles and make their own decisions. And you can argue for, you can argue against, but it's a very interesting exercise.
Yeah, and I think this is where the disinformation, misinformation, if they've got clarity as to what that is, actually that headline could be considered both. It is misinformation, but it is also disinformation as well. So yeah, so thank you very much from that. Richard has pulled together a list of links and resources that we will follow up with an email tomorrow. So they're here, and I think Richard's going to go very briefly through them, but just so that we will do a follow-up email tomorrow with all these links on, so that if you want to gather further information and sort of, resources and ideas, then these are the links. And I know Rich is going to mention Nicole, but Nicole is the sort of like the lead person behind Geography Everywhere, and she's done a lot of work on Posidonia and its impact. And we're going to do a follow-up webinar hopefully in the autumn term with Nicole. So I'll leave Richard to just quickly go through these links for you.
Yes, I mean, very, very quickly. I mean, Explorer Education Centre, that's my centre, and there's detail on our website there about the fieldwork that we do involving Posidonia. Depending on the age of your students or the interest of your students, there are various YouTube videos that you can see there for primary school children or for sailors, tourists. The production values vary depending on the budget of the people involved in the project. BBC, obviously, there's two very, very good articles here, which I recommend highly. And as Karen has mentioned, Nicole is a teacher based in Malta and has produced some fantastic videos, which I really, really enjoyed. And I'd recommend you check those out on the Geography Everywhere Facebook site, and there's longer videos available on YouTube as well. So these are all links. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about the topic, this is where you need to go.
Perfect, thank you. And then just finally, you can contact either myself or Richard. So myself, if you're interested in the Discover the World resources and future webinars, and Richard can be contacted via Twitter or via the ESPLA education website, which we will send you the link to tomorrow. And then also, if you want to know more about critical thinking and about the work that we are doing to implement this scheme into schools, we do have a Facebook community group. It's completely free to join. Everything we offer is free, as you know. It's completely free to join, and we will be sharing quite a lot of information about critical thinking and how we can implement this into your classroom. So we have a lot of people watching, actually, which is absolutely fantastic. If you've got any questions, please do email us at one of the formats that I've suggested. I want to say a massive, massive thank you to Richard. Richard and I have been working together for a few years now, and it's always a pleasure to welcome him to these webinars, because it's just great to, you know, have an interactive discussion about a topic like this. But also, he obviously does have a passion and a real interest behind Posidonia and its value. He also has a massive passion for fieldwork, and obviously both him and I have been a little bit quiet on the fieldwork front over the last 18 months or so. So it's great to be able to do something valuable for teachers. So I'd like to say thank you very much to Richard. Please do keep up to date with our webinars. We have one more CPD webinar this term. It's on the 29th of June, all about implementing a case study. So please do sign up to that one. And in the meantime, it's been a pleasure, and thank you very, very much. Stay safe, everybody, and we will speak to you all very, very soon. Thank you.